Hello folks, I'm Alex, this is Alex Unabridged, and these are my plans for my big old horror reading project in 2025. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, so horror today, a big old horror reading project for next year and probably beyond, to be fair, because I love horror. It is what it's got me into reading for pleasure back in my teens. But I've read less and less of it since joining BookTube, as I've been tempted away by a lot of other fantastic new genres. I found science fiction this year in 2024, which is now a genre that I love just as much as horror, which is fantastic. I'm super excited and pleased to have found something that I'm as passionate about, as horror. But I do feel that I've been neglecting my first love a little bit. So I need to get my mojo back with reading horror, and so I am going to return to my roots next year. Because what got me into reading the horror genre in the first place was reading stuff like, Stephen King to start with in my teens. I fell in love with his stuff. But from King, I then branched out more in my late teens and 20s and found kind of chills and thrills in some other sort of 70s, 80s, 90s British horror fiction. Not just those decades, before and after as well, but a lot of stuff came from that sort of period that I loved. As I say, I loved that in my late teens and 20s, and I want to get back to some of that stuff. That's stuff that really inspired me to kind of read more of that genre in the first place. The other thing is that BookTube, once I've been on BookTube, it's kind of shown me that I'm also very, very underread on American horror from that similar sort of era. But there are some fantastic sounding books that I've come across through other booktubers that I really want to dig into, that I really want to get read. A couple of shout outs I need to give. One to my good buddy Troy Tradup, of course, for providing me with a lot of inspiration on the US side of things. There are a fair few books in this project that have come from various recommendations of Troy's over the last couple of years, really, whilst I've been on BookTube. And a shout out to Ollie, of course, as well, over at Criminally, whose reviews, chats, discussions, all that kind of good stuff, especially on vintage horror, especially on the UK side of things, that's definitely inspired me to want to get back to this sort of stuff as well, this sort of horror. So I've put the books that I've picked into pairs, essentially, so with one American and one British book in each pair. And that way I can alternate sort of backwards and forwards between US and UK books. They're not paired in terms of like theme or subgenre or anything like that, but by length. There is one longer and one shorter book in each pair, so I can keep the combined page count across each pairing about even. I'm going to aim being the operative word, to read one pair each month in 2025, which would cover 24 books total across the year. But this is a big caveat. If I go slower and it trips into 2026, then that is absolutely fine by me. I'm not putting any pressure on myself regarding the timing of this schedule. I've got a really busy start to 2025 with editing Trash Tales and stuff like that. My personal reading time might take a hit, might well take a hit because of that. So I'm not making this schedule like super fixed. I'm just, easy breezy, chill out. It's one of those. I will get them read, but I'm not gonna like beast it to get them done on schedule. There are a couple of notable omissions in terms of authors, especially on the US side of things. There's no King in this list because I've got a separate King project on the go already that I've just started, which is to read all of King's novels in publication order. So I'll be getting through plenty of his stuff next year anyway. But that project, the King project, is a year's. It's going to go into years long because there's a lot of books. But there will be some King being read next year anyway. The other two authors that I've missed off this project are Dan Simmons and Robert McCammon, two pretty notable US authors of horror. And the reason for their omission is largely because the books that I really want to read from them are bloody long. A lot of their books are bloody long, but the ones that I would really want to pick for this they're just too long for me to fit in comfortably. I've limited myself to books that are less than 600 pages, and tried to keep most of them well below that. So I'll get to more Simmons and McCammon in the future for sure, but just not for this project. Right then, with all of that out of the way, let's get to my picks then. If anybody fancies any buddy reads with any of these, just let me know. I can make a note, and we can figure out, a buddy read close to the time when I know exactly when I'm going to be reading them. Okay then, starting in the US. First up, we've got The Ceremonies by T.E.D. Klein from 1984. And this is about a graduate student called Jeremy Frears who decides to spend his summer working on his dissertation in what he thinks is the perfect place, a small town called Gilead, New Jersey, which is the home to a strict religious sect and rather Puritan ideas. And whilst he's there, he unknowingly becomes part of a mysterious and sinister plan orchestrated by the strange Mr. Rosebottom, a little old man who might not be what he seems to be. This is the book that kind of kicked off this whole project idea. I grabbed this in an Audible sale back in October because it had been on my wish list for ages. And then it got me to thinking about all of the other stuff that had been on my wish list for ages. And so this project was born. So I had to start with that one, really. Okay, back over to Blighty then. I've got The House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson from 1908. So this is the earliest published book on my list. This features a discovered manuscript which recounts the tale of a recluse and his strange home, a home which has a double on an otherworldly plane where gods and monsters roam. The strangeness of this otherworldly plane spreads to his actual home, and he has to deal with things like swine-like monsters swarming from beneath the earth, and eventually a greater horror, more awful and merciless than any creature that can be fought or killed, so the blurb goes. I've just read a short story by William Hope Hodgson back in November, which is called A Tropical Horror, and I loved that. I really enjoyed the writing style and the imagination of Hodgson. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this one. From what I can tell on Tinternet, Hodgson was quite an influence on Lovecraft, so I believe. So I'm expecting some good, weird, cosmic stuff in this. Okay, hopping back across the pond again then, it's time for some Ray Bradbury with Something Wicked This Way Comes from 1962. And this is a coming-of-age story, I think, isn't it? Where two boys in a small town confront the sinister force of a mysterious carnival that preys on people's deepest desires and fears. I have read a few Bradbury novels and several short stories, but so far I've only read his science fiction. So I'm really looking forward to diving into some horror. I already know that I really like his writing style. There's a darkness to his tone, generally, I think. A weight and a darkness to his tone. So I imagine that like his horror writing is really good. And also this one has been on my shelf for the best part of 4 years, and so it's really about time that I got to it. Okay, back over to the UK then for The Haunting of Toby Jug by Dennis Wheatley from 1948. And this is about Toby Jug, who is confined to his bed after a wartime injury. He's a pilot, I think. and he becomes haunted by a sinister shadow that he believes to be a malevolent entity, while suspecting those around him of plotting to claim his fortune. And this leaves him questioning whether he is truly under supernatural attack or succumbing to madness. I have read some Wheatley before, and when I was a kid, actually, I was a little bit obsessed with this book, The Devil and All His Works. This is my mum's copy, which I now have possession of. But yeah, I was probably a little too young to understand a lot of stuff that was in it, and probably a little too young to kind of be reading it. I was probably about 9. But I was fascinated by it, the mystical stuff in it, all of the symbolism. There's a lot of great imagery in that book, and all of the symbolism and things like that I was fascinated by. So yeah, once I was old enough to kind of read one of Wheatley's novels, I did. But yeah, I've not read any of his work since my 20s, so it'd be interesting to dive back in and see what I make of it now. Over to America again then for Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco from 1973. And this is about the Rolfes, who are a New York family seeking a summer escape, who move into a picturesque Long Island mansion that slowly turns their idyllic retreat into an inescapable nightmare. This was a reasonably recent recommendation to me, I think from November. And I'd never heard of this one or of Marasco. But as soon as I read the blurb, I knew it had to go on the project reading list. I really, really like the sound of it. Okay, back to Britain then for some Clive Barker with Cabal from 1988. And this is about Boone, who is haunted by guilt for crimes that he believes he's committed. And he discovers the shape-shifting Nightbreed in a Canadian necropolis, joins their fight for survival whilst battling his own inner torment and searching for redemption through the love of a devoted woman. I've read a fair bit of Barker over the years, mainly a ton of short stories by the Books of Blood and other anthologies where Barker's works popped up. I've also read The Hellbound Heart, which I really liked. And I tried Weave World back in my 20s, early 30s, but I didn't get on with it at the time. I think it was probably a little bit too fantasy for me. So I may go back to that in the future. But for now, it's Cabal. Okay then, from the States, I've got Hell House by Richard Matheson from 1971. And this features Belasco House, infamous for its horrific and deadly history, and how it becomes the site of a new investigation by 4 strangers risking their sanity and lives to uncover its terrifying secrets. I've heard mixed reports of this one, but I really like the sound of it, so I'm going to give it a go. I've read a little bit of Matheson before. I've read I Am Legend, which I think is brilliant, and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is a short story collection, which I also really enjoyed. I've also got some more Matheson on my science fiction project for next year with The Shrinking Man, so it will actually be quite nice to see the difference between some of Matheson's horror and science fiction. Okay then, from my own land, I've got The Doll Who Ate His Mother by Ramsey Campbell from 1976. So this is set in Campbell's hometown of Liverpool, and is about a young woman, Claire, who is investigating the circumstances surrounding her brother's death and the mysterious man who caused the car accident that killed him, which leads her to other victims of similarly mysterious and sinister events. And I think this has got elements of Satanism within the plot as well. So everywhere I look online about this book, I see comments about how scary it actually is. So I'm in for that. I have read some Campbell before. It's been a bit of a mixed bag for me, but I know that this is meant to be a really good one, and I do really like the sound of it. Plus, it's another one that's been on my shelf for ages, and I need to get read. Okay, across the Atlantic again then for The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson from 1959. Had to be on this list, didn't it, really? And this is, of course, about 4 strangers drawn to the sinister Hill House to investigate its haunting, who soon find themselves ensnared by its growing malevolence as the house sets its sights on claiming one of them forever. I've only ever read The Lottery by Jackson so far, and I really feel like I probably ought to have read this by now. I did have this, Hill House, on my TBR a couple of times this year, but for whatever reason, I didn't end up fitting it in to either of those months. So shame on me for not having read this yet. Time to rectify this in 2025 for sure. Okay, and back to the streets of Britain then for The Rats by James Herbert from 1974. Killer rats. Rats become the predators, humans turn prey. That's about all you need to know, I think, isn't it? I've read, I think 4 novels of Herbert's before, but not this one. Probably his most famous. I've really enjoyed what I read of his, though. I think my favourite has to be The Fog. I really liked that one. The only one, actually, that I didn't like of the 4 that I've read was Creed, which I didn't like at all. But the others were solid, so it'd be great to get back to some Herbert and read his most famous work. Okay, then, from the USA, we've got The Case Against Satan by Ray Russell from 1962. This is about a teenager called Susan Garth who starts exhibiting alarming behaviour suggestive of demonic possession, and 2 priests with clashing approaches unite to confront the dark forces tormenting her and uncover a harrowing truth about the nature of evil. This is a really interesting one to me because this was published about a decade before The Exorcist, which is one of my favourite books of all time. So I'm really interested to see how much influence there might be from this on the William Peter Blatty. Plus, I love a good possession story, so fingers crossed for that one. I'm really looking forward to that. And from the UK then, we've got Toady by Mark Morris from 1989. This is about 3 ordinary boys who share a taste for the macabre in films, TV, books, comics, etc. And then they admit a 4th member to their club, Toady, who is not at all an ordinary boy. And Toady lures the boys to a séance where unimagined horror begins to overtake their lives. I hadn't come across this one at all until I think it was Kelsey from Slime and Slashers recommended it during Old School April, I think, last year, 2023. And it went on my list pretty much straight away. I really like the sound of this one. So thank you to Kelsey for that recommendation. Okay, the next American pick then is The Wolfen by Whitley Strieber from 1978. The Hunt for Werewolves in New York. I think that's the most succinct description I can give, I think. This is another new author to me, and this will be only the 2nd werewolf novel that I've ever read, the first being The Forsaken Boy by Troy Tradup. I really enjoyed that, and I want to try some more wolfy horror, so we'll give The Wolfen a go. And then to a very British choice with Ritual by David Pinner from 1967. This is set in a secluded Cornish village where a police officer investigating a child's murder becomes entangled in a web of psychological manipulation, sexual seduction, and sinister ancient rituals. And if that sounds familiar, it's because this was the inspiration for The Wicker Man, which is one of my favourite horror flicks. I don't watch a lot of horror films, but The Wicker Man is one that I do particularly like. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book that kicked that whole thing off. Okay then, from the US, we've got The Other by Thomas Tryon from 1971, 73. I've got conflicting dates for this one. This is set in a 1930s Connecticut town and explores the dark and chilling mysteries surrounding 2 13-year-old twins and the horrors of personality transference. It sounds like it blends kind of small town life with psychological horror. This is yet another new author for me. I was actually split between 2 Thomas Tryon books, this one and Harvest Home, but I know that this one is Troy's favourite horror novel ever, apparently, so I had to go with this one, really. And from the UK, I've got Slugs by Sean Hudson from 1982. Flesh-eating killer slugs. Again, another one I can be quite succinct about. um, I've tried to get to this for the last two Garb August events and failed to fit it in for both of them. So I definitely want to get to this in 2025. This is one that Ollie has mentioned on numerous occasions as well, so I'm pretty sure that he likes this quite a bit. So yeah, I do really want to read this, and I love a good animal attack type book, especially if it's something like slugs. Okay, back to the States then, and I've got The Auctioneer by Joan Sampson from 1976. This is about a small town family who are slowly stripped of their possessions, their freedom, and their hope as a charismatic but sinister auctioneer exploits greed and control to devastating effect. This sounds like it was an influence on Stephen King's Needful Things, which is one of his that I haven't actually read yet, but that I'm really looking forward to getting to. So it'll be good to have read The Auctioneer before I get to Needful Things. And I won't get to Needful Things, I think, until at least 2026 in terms of my Stephen King reading order. Okay, next for the UK then, I've got Sheep by Simon McGinn from 1994. This is about a family who move to a remote Welsh farmhouse to cope with their daughter's tragic death, but uncover some eerie bones and then learn of the house's dark, nightmarish history from a local farmer. I came across this, I think, when I was in my 20s, but never managed to source a copy of it to read. But really liked the sound of it, and it dropped off my kind of radar for quite a few years. And then when I was researching stuff to kind of think what do I want to put in this project list, I came across it again and kind of went, yes. And it's now available as an ebook as well, so I can finally get my hands on it and read it. Okay, the next American author then is Kathy Koja with The Cipher from 1991. This is about Nicholas, who is a would-be poet and video store clerk, who becomes dangerously obsessed with a mysterious black hole in his building's storage room and is drawn deeper into its dark and terrifying influence alongside his manipulative companion, Nakota. Kathy Koja is an author that I've only come across through BookTube again. I think it was via Andrew from It Came From The Page. So thank you to Andrew for that inspiration. But I love the sound of this one. It sounds nicely dark, so I shall look forward to that. And then we're back in Britain again with Graham Masterton with The Wells of Hell from 1979 or 81. Again, conflicting dates on that. And this is set in a peaceful town of New Milford, where a sinister force emerges from the depths, transforming a child into a monstrous being and unleashing an ancient supernatural evil that spreads terror and destruction. In the blurb for this, there is a reference to crab creatures, scaly crab creatures. Sold, I'm in. I think this is loosely based on a Lovecraft story, I think. Is it The Colour Out of Space, which I haven't read, which I might read before I read this, or definitely after if I don't get to it before. But yeah, reading the blurb of this, I can see why. It does sound weird and cosmic. I've only read one Masterton before, and honestly, I didn't like what I read. That was White Bones, which is one of the Katie Maguire series, which is a later book, I think early 2000s. But I think it might have been the narrator, because it was an audiobook, who massively impacted my enjoyment on that one. So I'm definitely up for trying some more, and certainly one from this kind of era of horror that I like, sort of 70s, 80s stuff. And especially if it's got evil crab creatures in it. Again, I'm sold on that alone. So we'll give that a go. Okay, next up, it's over to an American classic, Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice from 1976. So this is, of course, the tale of a vampire recounting his tragic and immortal life story filled with love, betrayal, and existential torment, a story that spans centuries alongside his manipulative maker. This is another one that I cannot believe I've not read yet. Shame on me. it's about time. So we'll get it in hopefully next year. From the UK, I've got The Reaping by Bernard Taylor from 1980. This is about an artist, Tom Rigby, who accepts a commission at an isolated mansion where he becomes ensnared in a terrifying web of supernatural events and dark schemes. And by the time he discovers the role he's intended to play in this diabolical design, it'll already be too late. I've never read any Taylor before. I've come across his name in my horror travels, but never actually picked up one of his books. But this one was re-released relatively recently as part of the paperbacks from Hellline, which is where it jogged my memory of Taylor. And I really like the sound of this one in particular, so this has gone on the list. Okay, and the final choice from the US then is The Flood, the first in the Blackwater series by Michael McDowell from 1983. And this is, of course, the mysterious saga of the Kasky family, the beginning of it, as a devastating flood brings a strange and beautiful visitor to the small, sleepy lumber town of Perdido, Alabama. Another author I'd not come across before, BookTube. And I know there's been a resurgence in popularity for Blackwater, the Blackwater saga recently, hasn't there? I hear a lot of great things about it. I think a lot of people are kind of coming to it for the first time and having a really good time with it. So it's time that I jump into this series and see what I think as well. And the final British pick then is Necroscope by Brian Lumley from 1986. This is set in the Balkan Mountains, I think, where a sinister vampire mentors Soviet necromancer Boris Dragosani in exchange for freedom. But their dark ambitions are opposed by Harry Keogh, a man who is aided by the risen dead in a battle between life and ultimate evil. I've read some Lumley before, but only short stories. Necroscope is quite a big saga, I think, which I think is what put me off from starting it years ago. But I reckon it's time I dive in with the first one and see if it's something that I want to devote some more time to, want to get into, etc. What I remember of Lumley's short stories, I really enjoyed. So there we go. That's the lineup then for my dive back into the darkness of some 20th century horror. There's plenty of classics in there, I think, that I really need to get read, as well as some books that I just personally really want to get to. So yeah, if anybody fancies a buddy read on any of these, then express your interest in the comments below. We can sort out specifics at a later date, but I will link to a spreadsheet that I've got with the reading order and stuff in case you want to refer back to that. But that will do from me today. That is plenty on my plans for my big old horror project for 2025 and probably beyond. Thank you very much for watching. As always, do drop your thoughts in the comments below. Any of your absolute favourites on my list, do let me know below. I'll be back on Sunday with my top 10 favourite reads for 2024, so I do hope you'll join me for that then. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.